Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. In the chair, I want to, say as little as possible, because time is precious. And it's important that we hear from everybody, including those of you who are in the audience. So without much ado, if you want to know about me, there's a lot to find out. So I'm not going to say much about myself. But we have 5 speakers for this, plenary, opening plenary session. And I'll go straight away to call on our first speaker, my colleague on the Abga Secretariat, Onyekachi Wambu, the Nigerian-British journalist and writer, as is described here. There's one thing, though, I want to emphasize, right? That any conversation about African reparations, from our point of view, has to be about truthfulness. And currently, there are a lot of lies being told. So let's try to use this particular space. If we really, really revere the memory of our ancestors, let's try to be truthful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Belle, for facilitating us getting together. I've been asked to really try and speak about what has changed since last year, since we all met last year. We're talking about moving from acknowledgement to action. So what actions on the table that we might be able to say, things are moving, but concretely things are also moving. It's important. I've decided to focus on some very high-level developments that have happened in the last year, initially, and then also what we continue to do at grassroots, and because it's really the work that we've done as grassroots activists, that we've kept these issues alive over the last 30, 40 years, that has meant that finally our leaders and some of the more high-level institutions are beginning to respond, sometimes to capture what we're doing and take into directions that should concern us, but sometimes genuinely to move things forward. And it's important that even though these developments are happening at high level, that we keep our eye on them, because we've seen what happens sometimes when there's a kind of elite capture and our governments start talking to European governments and then try and do side deals that don't necessarily address the things that we've been fighting for 20 years, which is proper justice for the victims of this period, and also their descendants and ancestors. And we saw that kind of elite conversation happening, particularly in Namibia, with the government and the Germans who were starting a discussion about reparations, which then ignored some of the communities in Namibia who actually went through the genocide and suffered some of the most egregious abuses. So as activists, we have to keep our eyes on what's going on. But very quickly, others have mentioned the key one that I wanted to talk about, which is that last year, the African Union in November, and the government of Ghana convened a big conference in Accra to put reparations on the agenda. It followed an earlier conference in summit in Accra in 2022, but that conference was very meaningful. There was massive support from CARICOM, and also from the ways that the AU and CARICOM are understanding it is that the AU have African-led governments, and CARICOM the same mostly. We know that there are nuances in Guyana and Trinidad, but in most other places, the governments there are led by Africans. And then elsewhere in the world, you're essentially where there aren't any African government or African-led governments, you're then dealing with civil society. So there was a huge civil society involvement from the Americas, from Latin and North America at this conference. And the big outcome, there were 3 big outcomes. One was that the reparations demands would be made on 3 bases. The first basis would be for slavery. The second basis would be for colonialism. And the third basis would be for neo-colonialism. So it's a huge agenda. And there's going to be a lot of work to do to understand those 3 frameworks. The third one, the neo-colonialism one, we know we probably will get a lot of resistance, as Brother Elder Cecil Gosper was saying, from our current governments who are involved in their own neo-colonial relationships. But that's the framework that people are going to move forward on. The other big outcome from that conference was that they talked about establishing a global reparations fund and trying to move some of this activism through the UN. And there were discussions about how you do that, perhaps a special court that has the competences and experts, such as was established for Sierra Leone and Kosovo, to be able to bring together a way to, and a mechanism to keep this on the agenda and move it through the UN system. The other important thing that came out in terms of follow-up work is that the AU itself, as was mentioned earlier, has now decided that 2025 will be the year of reparations, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. So that's the theme. So 2025 is going to be a framework for all of us to really press the AU because they've taken this on. And it's going to be managed through the CEDAW, that's the diaspora arm. But it's on the agenda at a very high level now with all the African countries, and what we have to decide is what we want out of this year, and whether the fight should be not to have a year, but to extend a decade or a longer period where we can actually get some traction and get some really useful outcomes. But there is a window to now decide what comes out of that year. We, in terms of the work I've been doing, been arguing for the AU, perhaps, you can try and engage other people, the people who we want the reparations from, but there's also self-repair that we can do ourselves that we don't need to decide for anybody to do. So one of the big things we're pushing them is to say, can we have an African Remembrance Day, a global African Remembrance Day, to actually remember the victims as the first step to seeking reparatory justice for them. Can we get back the ancestral remains of some of our heroes whose skulls and remains are in institutions here in museums and other institutions in the West. So there are things that we want to put on the agenda. What do you want to put on that agenda that we can get out of 2025? The other big development was obviously, has been spoken about by Clive, which is the move of the Commonwealth. And that's really important because now that it's been acknowledged in the communique, the Commonwealth Secretariat can now devote some resources to pushing this forward. Before, you couldn't have a conversation with them because they said it's not part of their mandate. So we can push the Commonwealth Secretariat to start having how we flesh out that communique that was spoken about by Clive. And the other really interesting development with the Commonwealth is that the new head of the Commonwealth, who was just appointed, was a Ghanaian, Shirley Watchway, who was a former Ghanaian Foreign Secretary, and she was the one pushing the reparations agenda in the conference last year. So we're pushing out an open door, and we can get the Commonwealth to dedicate some resources towards this. Obviously, at a lower level, the Church of England initially offered 10 million in terms of concrete action and was told that they were insulting people, and they raised that now to 100 million over the last year to begin a process of discussing how you start doing reparatory justice, and those conversations are going on. And then on the level of apologies, since the Dutch King's apology in 2022 and the Prime Minister's, Dutch Prime Minister's apology last year, no other ones have come forward, so there's nothing there. But I did just want to mention one final thing, which is that Sadiq Khan in London, in terms of memorials, finally has put together a competition for a memorial for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic Holocaust, and it's going to sit outside the Museum of London Docklands. The winning artist was, what's his name? The Wake by Caleb Brooks, and it will go up in 2026. So that's going to be the first memorial to the victims in London. There's one I know that is by the side of Parliament, but it's been disused. The other thing that we want to try and see is if we can press for a major, and this could be part of the action through Commonwealth, through the AU, for a major memorial at the heart of this nation's history and the sacrifices that have been made to construct this nation, somewhere like Whitehall, and that would be a UK-wide memorial. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go straight on to Lord Anthony Gifford, KC, a British hereditary PM and King's Counsel. He incidentally was at the first Pan-African Congress on Reparations held in Abuja, Nigeria in 1993, where he delivered a paper on the legal basis of the claim for reparations. Lord Gifford.
Yeah, yes, I've been asking you, and commending the, particularly Bell and Clive, on having the courage to stand up for justice and truth on an issue which is not popular among certain sections of the upper classes of society and the secret classes. I also congratulate you on the timing of the conference. I don't know whether it was deliberate or whether it was just good fortune. I expect it was deliberate because you knew about Chogam meeting. But having the dialogue that's been going on in the last few days has been most encouraging. Encouraging too were the reactions of the audience in any questions and any answers. There is an underlying support for the justice of the reparatory justice cause, which was very heartening and enriching to me. As for the behavior of the government, well, what I liked was the reaction of Prime Minister Frederick Mitchell, who said to the Prime Minister, "Weren't you a radical lawyer back in the day?" And then he said to the Foreign Secretary, "Weren't you a vocal advocate for reparations in the day?" And they looked very uncomfortable. That's exactly where we want to be, because the kind of dismissive and insulting manner in which the first answer was given, the United Kingdom does not pay reparations. It reminded me of Cameron when he came to Jamaica, where Jamaica is my other home, by the way. When he came to Jamaica and told people to move on. So we are now celebrating, I think, the end of what I would call phase one of the struggle for reparations. Phase one is you described it quite well in the heading of the conference, from acknowledgement to action. We've got past the stage of questioning the lawfulness and the correctness in law, international law, of the reparations cause. And we are moving on now. I think the second phase could be described as from action to definition. We need to define what reparations means, what the different countries and peoples that are entitled to it and obligated to pay it. There's a huge job to be done, arising particularly out of the CARICOM 10-point plan, as to what each recommendation and point of that plan, what it really means, what it's going to cost to actually put right the wrongs which are being described there. And then the last stage, I think, would be from definition to fruition. We will overcome. Remember, the African National Congress was founded in 1912. And everyone said, oh, it's a long way before you'll get majority rule. And yet they got it. Looking at this stage, and I apologize, I'm sometimes a bit slow in my voice, it's my condition. From my memory, the first time that I heard about reparations, it was from Rastafari. And I think we should make a tribute to Rastafari for keeping this whole question of repatriation and reparation in the public mind from an early stage. I remember Ja Lloyd in Jamaica, who finally realized his wish to return to Africa, and he died in Ethiopia. I remember Senator Fox of the Ethiopian Third World Federation talking about reparations. And we used to argue, is repatriation the same as reparation? And we came to a conclusion which we shared. No. Repatriation for those who wish to return was not the same as reparation, but it was a part of reparation. And therefore it appears in the 10-point plan, repatriation to Africa. And I've always had a little thought about how this could be accelerated, this desire, some people to live in Africa, some people to visit Africa. Africa is such a beautiful continent. I've been to many parts of it. And there are so many people in the Caribbean and no doubt here who want to see it but can't afford to. Why don't these private sector reparations people, I call them private sector reparations because these are non-governmental, the descendants and the churches and the other entities. Why couldn't we set up Black Star Airline to go as reasonable prices straight from Kingston to Accra, from Bridgetown to Dakar, from Port of Spain to Cape Town, taking people back across the Middle Passage in a completely different spirit and then to enrich the lives and to enrich the societies on both sides. Talking about the history of this movement, I, of course, pay a tribute to the person who influenced me most, a hero in the movement of reparations, Bernie Grant. Let's just today give a tribute with our hands saying, Bernie Grant. You remember how he came to Parliament in 1987 with that marvelous robe. And he was the one who started the African reparation movement. He taught me to realize that the solidarity between white and blacks is essential in this movement, and that reparations is something which is a benefit to the whole human race, the whole of the British people. And in the same time as he was founding the African reparations movement in Britain, the African Union set up the group of eminent persons on reparations. And I pay tribute to two other giants of the movement who I had the honor of meeting. Chief M.K.O. Abiola, who was the chairman of the eminent persons group. He was the candidate to be president for the elections which were due in 1993. And he was in every way a giant of a man. And I also pay tribute to Dudley Thompson, Honorable Dudley Thompson of Jamaica. He was the High Commissioner from Kingston to Lagos, and he was the rapporteur of the group of evident persons. And this was a time in the 1993 when there was a lot of positive vibes in the air. Nelson Mandela had been released. Nigeria was going to become a civilian rule, and Jamaica was ahead of the game. And they began to plan the first Pan-African Conference on Reparations to be held in March 1993. And I was by then living in Jamaica, and I knew Dudley Thompson well. And he said to me, "Tony, we'd like you to write an opinion on the legal basis of the claim for reparations." I said, "Dudley, there are plenty of black lawyers who can do that." Dudley insisted, and I found it an extraordinary honor and a very big assignment to draft the paper which I presented at the Abuja conference. What I advised was that the mass kidnapping and enslavement of millions of Africans was a crime against humanity. And the definition of that crime was made in terms of the charter in the Nuremberg Tribunal: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and inhumane acts committed against any civilian population, whether or not in violation of the domestic law were perpetrated. Just note that, whether or not in violation of the domestic law. So don't have anyone say to you, "Oh, slavery was legal in Barbados because of the slave codes," or it was legal in Britain, which it wasn't, because there were plenty of judges who were prepared to say, no, slavery is an odious state, which is not legal. But don't buy that argument about slavery being legal at the time. You could say that the transatlantic trade in Africa could be called the ultimate crime against humanity, because the perpetrators treated the victims as non-human, as beasts of burden, cargo objects. Everyone has their own way, and particularly listening to my friends and colleagues in Jamaica, I understand more, and I feel the depth of passion and internal rage and internal sorrow that have felt by the Jamaican people in a way that I cannot feel it, but I can learn. I can learn. And what I learned is chilling. I'll just give you one example. I went to Cape Coast Castle. Any of you who go to Cape Coast Castle will go to the door of no return and to the dungeon, and you'll be told by the guide that the floor of the dungeon is 4 feet below where you're standing, and the part between the floor and the base floor is made of feces. Gosh, when you hear that, sorry, you understand the disgusting nature of the British enslavement process. When we now have to start looking ahead to the next phase, and I think, as has been said, this requires us to put together our views on what reparations means. As a member of the Caribbean, of the Jamaica Council on Reparations, of course, I've been very much following the 10-point plan. The 10-point plan has been expanded recently, and it's worth looking at. It's a very interesting overview of the 10 areas where CARICOM thinks the priority should be. It's open to all of us to improve it, to correct it, to build on it. It starts, of course, with the full formal apology, and I echo what has been said before about the meaning of an apology. What are you apologizing for, British government? Not just for the fact that some of your ancestors did nasty things. No, you're apologizing for a system which you instituted, which you maintained for centuries, which killed millions of people, humiliated millions more, and which continues to have its poisonous effects today. Repair is not only needed for the health and economy of the Caribbean, but for a massive anti-racist package on which work should be done from today. In each country where there are African descendants, a program of anti-racist actions will be devised, led by people's organizations and financed from a reparatory justice fund. It's very, when the leaders, Mr. Sama, Mr. Cameron, talk about this as being a bygone phenomenon, when they try to make fun of the reparations movement by saying, well, should we sue Norway for the Vikings? Don't have any truck with it at all. The scale, the horror, and the continuing effects of the enslavement scandal are with us today. And that is why it behoves both white and black to be involved in something which affects us all. Repatriation, I spoke about, not just for Rastafari, but for all African descendants who want to set foot on the continent. Then there are other matters, the 10-point plan, which I won't go into in detail, but I just want you to think about how we put them into effect. Assistance in remedying the health crisis in the Caribbean. As you know, it's becoming known through recent research that people of African descent in the Caribbean have the highest incidence of hypertension and type 2 diabetes in the world, resulting from the stress, brutality, the poor nourishment, and over years of enslavement, and the inadequate health service left behind. Scientists are needed, doctors are needed, talents are needed to make sure that we know exactly what the consequences for people's health was and what is needed by way of funding, research, treatment. And the same goes for point 8 of the 10-point plan. Psychological rehabilitation as a result of the transmission of trauma.
Time.
The work being done.
Run out of time.
Institutional, intergenerational trauma. Let us look at all those points. Let us fill them out. Let us get all our best, most brilliant minds working out how they can be put into firm reparations money. Thank you.
Thank you. Swiftly, would speakers try to speak around about 7 minutes? Sorry, Dan. Our next speaker, whose very life embodies a lot of the tribulations that Africans face when they take up the challenge of seeking to represent to some degree of truthfulness what really is our cause. Her very life and service is an example of what fighting for repair, is. Diane Abbott.
Good morning. I can't hear anything. Good morning. I stand before you as the descendant of slaves. And most of the people in this room are indeed the descendants of slaves, which makes me very proud to help take forward the campaign for reparations. But this past week, and for many years before, we are hearing that reparations is all about the past. And because it's all about the past, we have to move on. Well, I have spent many years at the heart of the British state as a Member of Parliament. And let me tell you, these people love to chat about the past. They love to chat about the past. They love to take part in ceremonies, which are about the past. They love to wear robes, which are about the past. And they love to meet in a building, which is about the past. But somehow, when it comes to black people, the past isn't relevant. And of course, the truth is that the past is not past, and it isn't even over. And as the descendants of slaves, we know that we are living today with the consequences of the transatlantic slave trade. Whether it's injustice, whether it's inequality in the diaspora, but as between the diaspora in Europe and America and Africa itself. The reparations isn't about the past, it is about the here and now, which is what makes this campaign so important. So we are at a crossroads. The idea of reparations is no longer radical, it is a matter of justice. In 2015, the University of the West Indies called for reparatory justice in the form of debt cancellation, technology transfers, and educational programs. This was not a cry for handouts, but for meaningful partnerships to redress the imbalances created by history. Here in Britain and the British government, we can do our part. The legislative opportunities are clear. The Labour Party previously had plans to establish a National Reparations Commission. Keir Starmer seems to have forgotten that. This would have been a body which studies the impact of Britain's role in slavery and colonialism, assessing the economic and social and psychological harms caused to Black people, as well as establishing an educational trust to ensure that all children, Black, white, brown, are taught a truthful history of Britain's involvement and enslavement and colonization. I'm tired to hear British people tell me that, they helped abolish slavery. For what are you talking about? The truth is that Britain's wealth, and we are here in London, in the midst of it, Britain's wealth and power was built on the proceeds of slavery. But they don't want to acknowledge that. But we are going to make them acknowledge that. Some will argue that reparations are not just about the past, but they are divisive and impractical. I ask you this: is it not divisive to ignore the suffering of millions? Is it not impractical to let the cycle of inequality continue unchecked? The truth is, reparations are not simply about transferring wealth. They're about restoring dignity and recognizing our humanity, recognizing the humanity of those whose ancestors were dehumanized for profit. Reparations is not about guilt, it is about justice. And this meeting today is yet another step forward in the fight for justice. Thank you very much.
Precise and to the point and truthful. Kwame Kwei-Armah, the artistic director of the Young Vic Theatre and artistic advisor at Manhattan Theatre Club in New York.
Chair and committee, thank you so much for allowing me to sit with this distinguished panel to discuss this most profound of subjects. Certainly, I know for everyone in the room, but certainly for me. I'd like to start, actually, by asking you a question. How many of you go to Netflix, YouTube, or some other bastion of the media, maybe more than once a week? If you could just quickly raise your hand. Great. How many of you go more than twice a week? Okay. How many of you go more than 5 times a week? Great. How many people go maybe more than 100 times a week? Come on, more people put up your hands. You're lying. I know I saw you on that YouTube as you went down that rabbit hole. Thank you for that. And the reason, and Chair, I will yield some of my time back because I know that lunchtime is calling. And we all have that extra hour and the belly's rumbling on the old time zone, not the present. But I would say I'm really pleased to be able to speak for a few moments about acknowledgement to action. And what that means to me is that we have negotiated our way to this current place that we find ourselves now, and the finish line is really not that far away. The finish line, of course, means that we just start again at a slightly more equitable, or our children start again at a slightly more equitable position. But part of the reason why I asked the question that I asked is because where I sit in the world of the arts and entertainment, the battle for us sits with what you watch, sits with what you listen to, it sits with what you read, and it sits with the algorithm taking that and then saying there is demand. So if you don't demand it, we won't make it. Ultimately, it means that the part of the battle, part of the victory lies with us. We get the outcomes, I profoundly believe. We are the masters and mistresses of our destinies in some regard. What we ask for, we get the governments, we get the leaders that we deserve. But most importantly, we get the media that we deserve. Because if we don't ask for it to be differently, it will continue to do the thing that it does. And you will sit on YouTube going down a rabbit hole trying to find something that feels truthful, as the chair said. So part of our challenge, my challenge, is to speak to the artistic community. It is all about narrative and it is all about audience. My audience is to say to the artistic community, what part can we play in making sure we are articulating this struggle, this battle, this absolutely essential battle that we must win? How do we lead, or not even lead actually, how do we partake? Now, in truth, if you want to get a point across, you give it to either a musician or a comedian. A comedian makes you laugh, it bypasses the frontal cortex and it just goes in. And it becomes an emotion. Many films that you have seen, many plays, many books that you have read, you can't really remember the storyline, but you remember the feeling. So we are the arbiters, the articulators of feeling. And this at the moment, reparation is an intellectual debate for many, and for most, we have to make it a feel. We have to make it sit somewhere here so that when it goes there, there is a checkpoint. So here's what we've got at the moment. We have, I think as Diane said, and as other speakers have said, we have justice on our side. It is no longer radical to speak about this. It is now just a fact. We have stars, not enough, but we have stars, global stars, that are born in this land. We have producers and creators, not enough, but enough to be able to amplify a message. And here's what we really have. Amongst the artistic community, we have fatigue. We have enslavement fatigue. We have colonialism fatigue. We are tired. We are tired of only being portrayed through the lens of someone who needs something. I think one of the brilliant rappers once said, they have made us hate ourselves, but love their wealth. It's a big word, that, you know. Now, so for me, I personally am, as someone who has descended, like many in this room, from those who were enslaved, from those who have gone through the system that took away everything that was mine culturally and superimposed something on top. That moment when you landed from the motherland and you went to that plantation, and that plantation then seasoned you to move from a free, sentient being into a being that would be subservient and wish their own slavery on themselves. That process, for me, can't be captured in one or two narratives. On my way here, I checked. And I think as Diane was talking about history and our country, we stand on history. You can't hold it in one hand and then dismiss it in another hand. I checked how many narratives have been made about Winston Churchill. And just films and just narratives, and the list just wouldn't stop. And I went, how many have been made about Queen Victoria? And 25 in the last 30 years. Don't stop that. Don't even go there. And then I think about how many have been made about our Holocaust, about those, the 400 years. And because we've had 5 or 6, we are fatigued. All of a sudden, that becomes something that we don't want to put our art into. It becomes, my friends, that is a Jedi mind trick. All of a sudden, I stop telling my narratives because you have suppressed me and only put me in a bucket. Well, turn the bucket on its head, reshape the narrative, because that is what we do as artists. And so I say to you, and I yield floor, chair, I yield floor. I say, this begins with us on the inside saying, don't allow yourself to be tricked. There are thousands of stories that our ancestors have been through that are as entertaining as Star Wars, that are as moving as, or as constructive or deconstructive as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In every genre, we have stories that our ancestors have lived through and survived and have passed down to us in the way we move, in the way we shout, in the way we passionately discuss politics with each other. These are inheritances that we give away if we submit to being fatigued by the stories of our ancestors and our right and our duty to claim reparation on their behalf and on behalf of our children and children to come. So I say, and I put it to you, when you try and control your algorithm, watch the programs that speak to your story. Read the novels that speak to your story. Read the articles that speak to your story, and the algorithm will do the rest.
Well, I think particularly our artists have the challenge of knowing that Africans did not only suffer, they resisted. And the epic stories of that resistance are yet to be told. Yeah. Without further ado, may I call on my colleague, sister, freedom fighting combatant, Esther Xosei.
Greetings, greetings. Good to see you all. and good to be here. Distinguished family members, community members, fellow panelists, allies, and enemies. Because we're all here. And if we think that we will be having this conversation in this country at this time without the counterinsurgents here, then we don't know what we're doing. Exactly. So I want to begin. I am the Executive Director of the Maangamizi Educational Trust, which is the educational arm of the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign. And I'm saying this because it's important that you know this campaign. I'm glad that we are here 3 years later after the establishment of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations. But part of the narrative that is being buried is the history of this struggle. And yes, it goes beyond this APPG. We've honored and we should remember the work of our forerunners, especially in terms of parliamentarians, the late Bernie Grant MP, who was our voice in Parliament. And when he championed and took up the call for African reparations, as an African Guyanese MP in the British Houses of Parliament, he did so conscious of what this meant for our people. He wasn't representing Black Britain alone. He wasn't representing the Caribbean alone. He knew he had to stand for global Africa. And where we are at now, global Africa is being Caribbeanized. Our power base is being Caribbeanized. And this is within, and I am African Caribbean, by the way, born to parents born in the Caribbean, Guyana and Barbados specifically. I am a citizen of those countries. I'm born in the UK. And I say this because if we look at the narratives from the 1990s to now, they are totally different. So we are all using the word reparations, and that's good. But the meaning, as Lord Gifford mentioned, is different. Yeah? And that matters because at this point and this juncture of our people's story, we have to contend with state capture, movement capture, and elite capture. Okay? And I'm saying this because many of our forebears died and were assassinated for this cause, including the late, great Chief Abiola, who helped sponsor the office of the late Bernie Grant, MP. Many people do not know that. He helped fund that reparations work of the African reparations movement, which when the Organization of African Unity took it up, it was a civil society cause. There was a group of 12 eminent persons, but it was a movement from below. And just as then, as is now, there are not only, Clive Lewis in his intro spoke about class, yeah? We have class and we have national struggles in reparations. It's not just because we are all of African heritage and ancestry. We are not all representing the same thing, okay? Even elected officials. So yes, whilst it's good that reparations is coming out of many people's mouths, we have to be very careful to safeguard the integrity, the ethics, the values, and the principles of our African ancestors that live on in us and who rebel and who resist this objectification of dehumanization of who they are. So may I humbly suggest, the first thing that we need to do is to repair our own epistemologies, our own knowledge frameworks. In this day and age, no one should be referring to a slave trade. It was not a slave trade. It was a Maangamizi Professor Molena Karenga talks about the African Holocaust of enslavement. Some of you will know the term Ma'afa. But Maangamizi speaks to the intentional destruction of a people. But we're still here. Ethnocide and genocide, as coined by Dr. Raphael Lemkin, were intended to be used interchangeably. So ethnocide is where you exist, but you don't have your name, you don't have your language, you don't know your people's culture, you are not in touch with your lineage. You define yourselves by the identities of your European colonizers and enslavers. So we call ourselves these identities today according to whose knowledge framework? Who defined the world? Who called countries what they are that we are now defining our identities by? Where is our connection to our ancestors? We poured libation to give us that humility to connect with them. And some of us react when we hear this terminology. Even though we've got the knowledge producers, we've got INASAR, the International Network of Scholars and Activists for African Reparations in 2017. Grassroots activists from here challenged academics for using this term slave trade. And it was decided we should not be using it. That battle was won. Even many academics racialized as white are arguing this point, okay? Now, when we keep saying slave trade, we are going against the ethics of African reparations. We had Professor Molena Karenga at our last year's conference, and he spoke about this. He spoke about what it means when you say a slave trade. You reduce the morally monstrous destruction of life, culture, and human possibility to this issue of a bilateral exchange, that there was just somebody who benefited more than the others. And we open ourselves up to a challenge to our global claim. So those of us waging this struggle must also study and learn, and we must correct ourselves. We must self-repair. We have to. Our ancestors were human beings. They were not slaves. They were conscious of their humanity, and they were conscious of everything that was happening to them. Let me move on. Last year, but we had to get those preliminaries out of the way. I know I've got 2 minutes, but it's really hard. It's really hard because a lot needs to be said. No, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. So when I'm quoting here a line from Akala's Maangamizi track that was inspired by our work in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. In 2012, he produced this track. When the truth is told and there is a dignity to remember the dead, meaning our ancestors, because as long as they are distorting the past, it means they have the intention of doing it again. So even in our lifetime, history, our story, her story, is being rewritten. And if some of us were not here, you would not know the role that we played. When we went to our sister, Belle Ribeiro as MP, and lobbied her to set up this APPG because we had constituents who had signed the Stop the Maangamizi We Charge Genocide Ecocide petition, over 25,000 people and counting, that we knew we were accountable and answerable to. Yes, and we said this is what they want. And what did that petition ask for? One of two things. The all-party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. And we did so, having previously lobbied Green Party members. Why? Because they came to the African Emancipation Day Reparations March in 2019, Scott Ainsley MP, and said, what can we do? And we said, our people need their voices heard. They want a commission of inquiry. This is international law. We are survivors. We are affected communities, and we have a right to speak our truths and to tell our narrative. And that is the demand, but it is being ignored. Ignored. Last year's conference declaration, I have it here. It's not on the website, Madam Chairperson Bell, anymore. I don't see it. But the last line that we asked people to commit to last year, we urge that this dialogue takes place by establishing an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparations. Where is it? Where is the action? Part of what we intended and we hoped would happen with this APGAR, as we call it, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations, is this commission. We can take action on this demand of our people right now. We can set that example and show leadership. Reparations motions were passed in Islington, in Lambeth, for atonement and reparations for Britain's role in the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, and by Bristol City Council. Okay? We did that. But yet, many of our elected officials are not listening to us. So my people, this is important, why we are here. This all-party parliamentary group for African reparations is historic because it is creating a space to hear the different narratives. But you have to know that you have a right to be heard. And when you are lobbying your MPs, please go beyond the letter that is in here. And it might, please, I'm a member of this secretariat with Brother Kofi, but we would have expected to see a recognition of the demand for the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice or Reparations in this letter. That is important, okay? It's not just about what's happening in the Caribbean or Africa. We are here and we have to hold our elected officials to account to the African reparations agenda. I close.
Thank you. I must say, this is for the records. This is for the records. Our engagement and collaboration with Bell did not start when she became an MP, and was not only about lobbying, for an all-party parliamentary group for African reparations to be set up. It started when Bell was the Black Students Officer for the National Union of Students. And that's how far back Bell's own activism on reparations goes. And we've come a very long way. And amidst all the pressures and the challenges, she still holds on fast. But we are all on a learning journey. And iron must sharpen iron in this sacred fight for reparatory justice. Because as African people of all generations, if there is anything we have that we must not toy with, that is the real key to our true freedom, justice, and prosperity. It is genuine reparatory justice. So we will continue the debate, ensuring that iron keeps sharpening iron in this fight. Now, this session is over, and to say that those speakers and chairs of the panels should go to the back room to collect, their food, and please, stay for the conversations, because the breakout sessions are really where you all come in. The last thing I want to say at this point in time is that, yes, some of us have been in this for decades. And it is good to see many more coming on board. But I warn those who think they are going to buy places in the front ranks of our African struggle for reparatory justice in order to destroy the movement. And many are now swarming. Just like those of your ancestors who denied the humanity of our ancestors and committed heinous crimes, thinking at that time they were all powerful and could do anything. Now, you, their descendants, you see where you are. Actually, in the garbage tank of history, trying to beg. And those who will betray this fight, many, many, many years to come, whether you are African or non-African, you will be called out to pay the full price. Thank you.